Hey guys, Mike Frontera here, back with another retirement theory video. So a question I get all the time: I've got $1 million portfolio. How much can I withdraw from it? And then the thing that typically follows next is, I've heard of this 4% rule that says I can draw 4% or $40,000 per year. And so, is there any validity to that? Does that make sense in the real world? By the way, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button and hit subscribe to see more videos like this on everything retirement planning. And it's sort of like a lot of these other things where it's a yes and no. So first, where did this 4% rule come from? Well, it came from actually about 30 years ago, 1994. There was a retired financial advisor. His name was William Bengen. And he had gone back historically and looked at a portfolio that had 50% stock and 50% bonds, and realized that if he took a 4% withdrawal out each year and increased it for inflation, that at the end of the 30 years, about 90% of the time, you would have not run out of money. And so this 4% rule kind of took hold, and now it has been used as a common rule of thumb for many people. However, the major thing that it is missing is that in a real world scenario, withdrawals just don't occur that way. If you start to think about it, we have Social Security, maybe part-time work. You have different income needs at different stages in your life. And so really what I'm going to be looking at here is the importance of having a cash flow projection out into the future so that given a sum of money in a portfolio, what is actually a reasonable amount to withdraw. So let's go look at this hypothetical scenario with Jerry and Ginny, and we can see how all of these different factors kind of play in. Okay, so we got Jerry and Ginny Sampleton. They're both 60 years old, retired. They have exactly $1 million in assets. We have their life expectancy set to 30 years. So basically the same setup that we were talking about with William Bengen's 4% rule example. And so let's dive in. We're first going to assume that we are invested moderately. I'm assuming roughly a 5% rate of return each year. And what this software does is this will help us figure out how much income we're actually going to get out of this portfolio. So again, no other factors in here. Literally, these guys are in a vacuum with just $1 million in an IRA. I am going to run maximum retirement spending. So if I run that, there it is, actually pretty darn close to $40,000. Now, this is assuming a net $39,000. So it's actually going to draw off a little bit more than that. But you can see, as far as getting a reasonable rule of thumb around that 4%, that's pretty close. And so let's take a minute and talk about these the assumptions. This is assuming an 80% probability of success. And so what that means is this is all run through what's called a Monte Carlo simulator. And what a Monte Carlo simulator does is it takes 1,000 different trials in all different market conditions, good markets, bad markets, and it says what percentage of those trials do you get to the end of your lifetime with money left over. And so here, this is set to 80%. Okay, so let's see what happens here. So I'm going to save that to the plan. And if I go here to my withdrawal screen and update this, it should show us about a 4-ish% withdrawal rate. Now, again, this is in a vacuum, so this does not take into account any of the real world stuff that happens when a couple retires. So let's first assume that Jerry and or Ginny decides that they want to do a little bit of part-time work. And what I'm assuming here is that between the two of them, earn $24,000 a year for the first 5 years in retirement. And so if I turn that on, now I'm going to recalculate our maximum spending, and all of a sudden we should see this jump up. There you go. So that $24,000 a year for 5 years means that on average they could actually expect to live on a total of $43,000 a year in retirement. So I'm going to save that to the plan. The other thing that we hadn't taken into account before, and this is one of the big ones, is Social Security. I am going to just assume I took the average Social Security benefit in 2024, which was $1,907 a month at full retirement age. Now, this base scenario assumes that they actually take it early, so they're going to get less. But the point is going to be the same, which is between the withdrawal income and the Social Security income, it's going to drastically change the pattern of their withdrawals. Let's go down here. We're going to run that maximum retirement spending again. And now, lo and behold, we have $72,000 a year. And now let's take a look at what these withdrawals look like, because I think that's where we're going to start to see some difference from that 4% rule. As you can see here, before we even get into the numbers, there's bigger withdrawals in the beginning, a big drop in withdrawals after that, and then it sort of continues on. So that percentage actually starts higher, and then it drops way down, and then it bumps back up again. So why is that? So let's zoom out a little bit and look at the entire cash flow picture. Here we are. We've got the part-time work showing up here in the first year. And again, we've got our total expenses close to about $82,000. And so we are drawing about almost 6% of the portfolio. And that's a reasonable amount for us to draw, because all of this is still setting the probability of success at 80%. Now, when we look at the income flows a little bit closer, the biggest thing that's going to do is change the pattern of the withdrawals from the portfolio. So I'd like to go back to the different expenses that we're looking at, because as we create these cash flow projections, one of the most important things that you want to do is break out some of your expenses. So for example, you have your bills and your mortgage and any of these kind of have to have expenses. A mortgage, for example, that's going to go as long as you still owe money, but the amount of money you need to cover that mortgage does not go up for inflation, right? It stays the same amount each year. However, your gas, your utilities, all these kind of necessary expenses do tend to go up each year with inflation. Then you have expenses that are for fun, vacation or socializing, or any kind of these discretionary expenses tend to tail off as time goes on in retirement. And so what I've got here is just a very basic display of those breakouts of expenses. And what you'll notice is it'll change how much that we can expect to get in retirement income based solely on breaking out these expenses. If we look at the maximum retirement spending based on just Social Security and some part-time work, we get a maximum retirement spending of $72,000 a year. So let's actually take this opportunity and assume we're going to delay Social Security. Okay, so here now I've got Jerry and Ginny taking Social Security instead of at 62, taking it at 70. And if I recalculate this, now we can expect to live on $76,000 per year. Again, just making that small assumption change. And then finally, I'm going to take these different expenses and let's go through them. So you have, I set a travel expense of $10,000 a year for 15 years. We set that as a separate piece that will fall off after that time. Then these discretionary expenses, some of these nice to have expenses, these little extras, all that kind of money. These are the types of expenses that often tend to slow down as time goes on. So what we did here is I added no cost of living adjustments on those. All right, so we've got this big chunk of money that every year we're not going to increase. Okay, it's going to be a flat $40,000. And then finally, medical expenses tend to increase and increase at a faster rate than typical inflation. So my inflation assumption here is about 2.5%, a little bit less than that. But my medical expenses, I'm figuring, are going up by 5% every year. Let's run this again, and we should see this decline, right? Because, okay, so it goes down to 26,000. Reason being is we are separately accounting for $60,000 of expenses here. So going back to what our previous assumption was, was that we could spend $76,000 a year in retirement. Well, with just breaking these expenses out a little bit more intelligently, now we have $60,000 that we can spend here plus $26,000 that we can spend here. So I'm going to save that to the plan. And so now, again, the same $1 million portfolio, when we started out, we were figuring about $40,000 a year. Now we're over twice that. We're figuring about $86,000 per year. And then further, let's go into that withdrawal screen. So we actually start with a much larger withdrawal. So if you come into retirement and you're thinking, okay, I've got to stick to this $40,000 a year or this 4% rule, there's a good chance that you're leaving a ton of money on the table. And by the way, we haven't talked about any kind of optimization as far as different account types. A lot of people have either a brokerage account or Roth IRA assets. We haven't talked about Roth conversions or any of these different things that can help boost this retirement income picture even further. We also haven't talked about changing our risk within the portfolio. We stated a very conservative to moderate type of portfolio risk here. So there is a lot more that goes into it versus just sticking with that 4% rule of thumb. And I think that rule of thumb is for many people so far off of what reality is that it's more harmful than useful in most cases. So, do you have questions for me? Come visit me at www.retirementtheory.com or send me an email at mike@retirementtheory.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.